The Tao of Self-Confidence, episode 932. Welcome to the Tao of Self-Confidence, where I share stories of amazing women who have discovered their inner journey to self-confidence. Visit our website at thetaoofselfconfidence.com. Your inner journey to self-confidence awaits. If you're tired of being the best-kept secret in your industry, listen up. You don't need to be louder, you need to be seen. Grab my free Visible Framework Toolkit, the exact steps I use to go from overlooked to being the go-to expert people turn to for impact and insight. Download it now at thetaoofselfconfidence.com. Well, hello friend, welcome to the Tao of Self-Confidence, where I share stories of amazing women who have discovered their inner journey to self-confidence. I'm your host today, Sheena Yap-Chan, and today I have a phenomenal woman on the show today. She is a tech executive, advisor, and board member, and I'm super excited to have her on to share her story with us on confidence. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Deborah Liu. Hi, Deb. How are you today? Maybe you can fill in a little bit more about yourself to the listeners.
Yeah, it's wonderful to be here, Sheena. I am very honored to talk about self-confidence, something that I lacked early in my career, and it took me a long time to get to the place I am today. I have spent my career in tech, so I started at companies like PayPal and eBay, and then I went to Facebook, where I was an executive I was there for 11 years. And then most recently, I was the CEO of Ancestry for 4 years, which was a 40-year-old tech company, which is helping people discover their family journeys and their family roots. And I decided to take the rest of past year off, and now I'm starting something new. We have a stealth startup in AI, which I'm really excited to share with everyone about when the time comes.
That's awesome. First off, thank you so much for just paving the way. You know, there's not that many Asian women in high leadership roles, especially in tech. So seeing someone like you doing that is really inspiring, and it just shows others what's possible. And then I love that you're starting a AI startup. I think AI is such a great technology, and not a lot of women are using it. And so right now we're still facing a huge gap, but seeing women like yourself creating that space, being able to tell them that, you know, AI is a tool. When we use it for good, good things happen. Leading by example really just gives us more reason to step up, use this technology, and utilize it for something positive. So thanks again. And Deb, what's your cultural background?
Yeah, so I was born in New York. My parents are actually from Hong Kong, and so we are Cantonese. And when I was 6, I actually moved to South Carolina, so I grew up in the Deep South.
Thanks for sharing that. And what'd be your favorite self-confidence quote?
This is what I use, which is, I think it was Chuck Swindoll who said, life is 10% what happens to you and 90% what you choose to do about it. And it's the same thing about confidence, right? Which is, it's you can either let the world just dictate what it is that you're doing, or you can turn it around and say, these are the things and choices that I'm making. And you can own that. And I think it's really important. The word agentic is something which is basically having agency, and now it's been used in AI a lot. So we're talking about agents. Being agentic means taking control and taking the reins. So I wrote this book called Take Back Your Power, because I felt like I had such a confidence gap early in my career and throughout my career. Even when I was fairly successful from the world standards, I also was wondering, like, am I good enough? Should I do this? And I talked a lot about that in my book, which is, you know what? Like, everybody feels this at some point, and you get to choose what you do about it.
I love that. That's a great quote, and it's so true, especially, just current events. There's just so many things that's happening, and it's up to us. Do we take that in, or do we do something different? We can't control what happens, but we can control the outcome of it. So I love that. And even the title of your book, Take Your Power Back, because especially in Asian culture, we're not taught to do that. We're not taught to take your power back. We're taught to never make any noise, stay in the background, do as you're told. And that really hurts us. So I love that you have a book like that where people can read and check out and really learn how to reclaim their power. And in your own words, how would you define self-confidence?
Well, I think, often we think that self-confidence is a type of arrogance, or that you believe in yourself no matter what. But it's actually just owning who you are. I think so much of the mistake that we make about self-confidence is that you know everything. That's actually not true. Instead, it's knowing what you do know and owning, the answers. I think especially for women, they said women have to have 100% of the qualifications, or they have to know the perfect answer. They have to be the expert in the room. But you know more than you think you do. You actually have more information to contribute than you think you do. And self-confidence is bridging that from, basically the conversation and saying, look, I can contribute this much. I don't know everything, and that's okay.
Thanks for sharing that great definition. I love how you mentioned that, we don't have to know everything. And I always tell people when it comes to being an expert, you just have to know a little bit more than everybody else. And even if we might not have the answer, confidence is knowing that you're more than capable to figure it out. And as women, we are definitely more than capable. But like, sometimes how we see ourselves really stops us from moving forward. So I love that you were able to share that and have a great reminder for all the listeners. And what was your life like before your discovery of self-confidence?
Well, I think that I had terrible imposter syndrome, right? You walk into a room, I grew up in a small town where somebody said to me before I went off to college, you're a big fish in a small pond. And once you go to, so I went to Duke, which was, people in my town didn't leave the state to go to college. Like maybe one or two people did every year. And so it was just, they're like, you're going to be a small fish in a big pond. And that really stuck with me for so many years where I thought about it. And I worried that, I wasn't going to be able to be successful in, the wider worlds because I had never really had that kind of support. And so once I got out there, though, I realized, and, I had terrible imposter syndrome when I was in consulting, and then I was new in tech. And I realized something, though, which is that you know more than you think you know. And second is owning who you are is such an important part of the journey, which is, hey, you're not perfect. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to know all the answers. But part of it is teams are successful because they have the conversation, because they're challenging each other. That when you withhold, so I was extremely introverted as well. And so when you withhold information, you're actually keeping something back from contributing in the workplace, from contributing to the conversation. And suddenly I flipped that switch where, I went from I need to be the expert in everything to I can be actually somebody who's exploring and learning and becoming better all the time. And so if you walk into every conversation saying, what can I learn from this conversation? What can I contribute? Suddenly it changes the way you look at the world.
Thanks for sharing that. I love how you mentioned the topic of imposter syndrome because there's a report that mentioned, 74% of women in the workforce deal with imposter syndrome, which is a huge number. And I think sometimes we have to remind ourselves that imposter syndrome can also be a good thing. I always tell people that it's also a sign that you're leveling up, you're moving up to the next thing. And so growing is not comfortable. Growing is very uncomfortable. It's going to be awkward. You're going to start having anxiety, but that's all part of the process. And so if we look at imposter syndrome a different way, in a positive way, it's just a reminder that it's our next step to our greatness, to that leadership role, to that promotion, whatever that may look like. And, what was that point in your life when you realized you were more than enough, especially being in tech, especially being, an Asian woman? It's not always seen. When you look at the numbers, it's very small. But what made you decide to push forward and be in this space? What was that aha moment?
Well, first, I think there's, just reflecting on what you just said, there's a difference between impact and learning, which is you can have lots of impact or you can be learning a lot. If you're new to a job, you're learning a lot, but you can't have a lot of impact. If you are so good at the job, there's a U-shaped hole in the organization, you're probably not learning very much, but you're doing and having strong impact. And I realized that, a lot of people just say, hey, look, I just want to stick to what I know. And when you force yourself out of the comfort zone, you're learning and it hurts and it's hard. And there's a steep learning curve. And yet you're going to be stronger on the other side. And I decided I wanted a career where I was always learning. I was always challenging myself because it takes a lot of guts to do that, right? Because it's easy to stay in your lane and do the thing that you're great at. But if you're learning, you're always going to be behind because you're learning it from someone else. And I decided at some point in my career early on that I would always be trying to learn something new all the time. So I use New Year's resolutions to do that. I use different goaling methods because I want to always be growing. And I think that helps build a lot of confidence because, think about when you start something, you don't speak the language or you don't know how, at the beginning of this year, I didn't know that much about AI. And so I spent a lot of time working on it. Beginning of last year, I spent most of the year learning AI and suddenly I'm building a company in it, something I would never have expected a year ago. And so that builds your confidence as well, is to show the before and after when you see yourself progressing, going from one place to the other. And that's really that's a philosophy I live with, which is always be pushing yourself to the next thing. Don't stagnate, because that gives you confidence. Because once you learn something, you're like, I can do that again and again.
I love that. I love how you mentioned that you just started learning AI in the beginning of last year because, people might think you have to study years and years and years to get AI. When in reality, it's up to you, right? When I first started learning AI, I didn't even know what a prompt was, to be honest, but I was willing to figure it out. And, I love utilizing AI. I think it's such a great tool, especially for women to just get their ideas out there, utilize it to build a brand, utilize it to save time. There's so many good things that come out of it. And, once they embrace it, it's just, for me, I think it's a huge game changer. So the fact that you're creating an AI startup, I think is great because you're leading by example. You decided to learn about it, really like deep learning. And then now here you are creating a startup. And because of that, what's your life been like now?
Well, it's interesting because people think AI is like a technology that's super inaccessible, but we've gone through technology revolutions before, like the internet. It's not like all the people who worked at companies before knew the internet. Somebody had to come along and learn it and figure out new business strategies, figure out new go to market. But if you were somebody who was in marketing before, you just learned how to market on the internet, right? And so you can take all your skills and apply it to the new technology. The same is true of mobile. When the mobile revolution came along, it's not like people had 10 years of mobile experience to figure out what they're doing, but instead, those who were willing to learn were the ones who went to the forefront. And, early in that revolution, you saw like new companies come along, new ways of doing business. Companies pivoted, to focus on mobile. And so I think the same is true of AI. I am worried though that AI is very male centric right now. Founders of all the AI companies are men. A lot of the investors in the space are men, and women actually use AI less than men, and by like multiple, like double digit percentage points. And they asked why, and a lot of women said it's because I want to do my own work, right? I want to like, I want this to be authentic. But AI is a tool like any other. It's like the internet, right? It's like I don't use search because I want to authentically find things, but it's a tool like any other, and it's not necessarily, you shouldn't use it just to like do your work. You're using it to actually help you be better so that you free up time for better, deeper thinking, for stitching the dots together, pulling together strategy. AI is a tool. And if you say, I'm just not going to use this tool to make my life better and easier, I think that we're going to leave behind a generation of leaders that are not going to emerge. And so I do encourage a lot of women, especially to understand what the revolution is coming and actually leverage it so that you can be better at your job, so that you can free up time to do the things that you want to do.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think this is such an important message. I agree with you when it comes to AI. There is a huge gap between men and women utilizing it. And I know as women, we've been programmed to be like the superwoman of everything, trying to be a one-man show, and really that is so impossible. Men, they learn how to delegate, outsource, because they understand that they have their zone of genius, and in order to get into that, they need to delegate. And this is why AI is such a great tool, especially for women, because they can still be authentic and utilize this tool. They can create different ideas based on their expertise, their personalities. There's so many things you can utilize when you have AI in your corner. And when more and more women see that there's so much good that come out of it, it just, like you mentioned, it can revolutionize the world. It can help women see things from a different perspective. And we can build more women in business, women making more money. It just becomes a whole win-win situation. So thank you so much for sharing that important message and being the forefront when it comes to AI and helping women bridge that gap. And, to the woman who's listening to your episode, she may be in her own journey to self-confidence. What would be that one tip you would give to her?
Self-confidence builds when you actually do, when you see yourself doing. For me, I am not very athletic. I didn't work out for a long time, and I realized I need to do that. And, recently I've had to do weight training. I come from a family with very brittle bones. And so I started weight training. And at first I'm like super weak, right? I can barely lift a 5-pound thing. And so I got a tonal and, I'm working my way up. And now, I do regularly, like over, they track the weights, I'm regularly doing like 1,000 and 1,500 pounds over how much you're lifting over the course of a session. And I think that this is, I could never have imagined that at the beginning. And so I think it's the same thing as you think about AI and all these other new tools, which is you get better at it by doing it, not by thinking about it, not by, watching videos about it, but actually doing. And I think that that builds the more confidence than anything else is actually seeing yourself, imagining yourself doing it, continuing to progress, tracking your progress, and then thinking back to where you were before.
I love that. It's true, right? Nothing happens if you don't take action. In my book, Bridging the Confidence Gap, I talk about this strategy of ready, fire, aim. Start before you're ready, take action, and just course correct as you go, because that's how we get the results. When you're trying to do ready, aim, fire, like you're still trying to aim and there's nothing that you're firing out. So this is why it is important to take action, be okay to make mistakes, course correct, because that's how we really get the results. And the more you keep doing it, the better you get at it. So thank you for sharing that great tip. And if our listeners wanted to get to know a little bit more about you and what you do, or check out your AI startup, is there any links or social media profiles we can connect with?
Yeah, so I have a Substack. So I write weekly on a Substack. I never thought I was a writer either, but I just on a whim and a New Year's resolution decided I was going to write a newsletter, and I am in my 5th year of writing it. And so it's been really incredible because I've met so many people, and I force myself to learn new topics to talk about every single week. And I think that that is a way that I connect with people as well. And so if you want, it's deblu.substack.com if you're interested in signing up for that. And then I will be talking more about my next steps too.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing that. And to our listeners, if you want to connect with Deborah, you can also head on over to thetowofselfconfidence.com and search for Deborah's name. Her show notes will pop up along with everything else that we talked about. And I just really want to thank Deborah today for taking the time to share her story and wisdom on confidence. So thank you so much for being on the show today.
Wonderful to be here, Sheena.
Thanks again for being here. And to our listeners, be on the lookout for another new episode of another amazing woman's journey to self-confidence, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye for now. You can now purchase The Tao of Self-Confidence, a guide to moving beyond trauma and awakening the leader within on Amazon, Barnes & Noble's, Walmart, Indigo, and other major book retailers. Get your copy today. Thank you for tuning in to another amazing episode of The Tao of Self-Confidence. Please subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to get your daily boost of confidence.